I was 17 when I got my first regular babysitting job for the Morrison family. They had two kids, Emma, who was 6, and little Jake, who was 3. The house was this big colonial on Maple Street with a long driveway and tall windows. Mrs. Morrison always left detailed notes about bedtime routines and emergency numbers written in neat handwriting on yellow sticky notes. That Tuesday night started like any other. I arrived at 7, and the parents left for their dinner reservation downtown. Emma and Jake were already in their pajamas, watching cartoons in the living room. The house felt warm and safe with all the lights on and the kids giggling at their show. After I put the kids to bed around 8:30, I settled into the couch to do homework. The house was quiet except for the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Around 9:15, the phone rang. I answered with my usual babysitter greeting, but no one spoke. I could hear breathing on the other
Hello,
end
Johnson
before the
residents.
line went dead.
This is Sarah
15 minutes
speaking.
later, it rang again. This time when I answered, a man's voice asked, "Have you checked on the children?" The question made my stomach drop. I hung up immediately and ran upstairs to check both bedrooms. Emma and Jake were sleeping peacefully in their beds. The phone rang a third time at 10 o'clock. The same voice said, "You should have checked the children." My hands were shaking as I hung up. I called the restaurant where the Morrisons were eating, but they had already left. Their cell phones went straight to voicemail. At 10:20, the phone rang again. This time the voice was closer, almost whispering, "I can see you through the window." I dropped the phone and ran to close all the curtains. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear in my ears. When I looked out the front window before closing the curtains, I saw a figure standing under the streetlight at the end of the driveway. The person was wearing a dark hoodie and just standing there, facing the house. I backed away from the window and grabbed the cordless phone. I was about to call 911 when I heard a sound upstairs. It was a soft thud, like someone had dropped something. I crept up the stairs with the phone in my hand, checking Emma's room first. Her bed was empty. The window was open and the screen was pushed out. I ran to Jake's room and found his bed empty too. Both children were gone. That's when I heard the basement door creak open downstairs. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers and whispered
Please
our
hurry.
location to the
Someone's in the
dispatcher.
house. I'm
The
hiding.
police arrived within minutes and found both children in the basement with a man who had been hiding there for hours. He had been watching the family's routine for weeks, waiting for the right moment. The phone calls were coming from inside the house, the whole time from the basement extension. The Blackwood family lived in an old Victorian house on the outskirts of town. Mrs. Blackwood collected antique dolls, and they were displayed in glass cases throughout the house. Their daughter Sarah was 8 years old and had been having nightmares about the dolls moving at night. I had been babysitting Sarah for about 3 months when the incident happened. It was a Friday night in October, and the wind was howling outside, making the old house creak and groan. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood were attending a wedding and wouldn't be back until after midnight. Sarah was unusually quiet during dinner, picking at her chicken nuggets and glancing nervously at the doll case in the dining room. She kept saying the dolls were watching us eat. I tried to reassure her that they were just toys, but even I felt uncomfortable under their glassy stares. After tucking Sarah into bed with her nightlight on, I went downstairs to clean up the kitchen. The house felt different at night, with shadows moving across the walls and the dolls' faces seeming to follow me as I walked past. I turned on the television to drown out the creaking sounds. Around 10:30, I heard Sarah calling for me from upstairs. When I got to her room, she was sitting up in bed, pointing at the corner where shadows danced on the wall. She said one of the dolls had been standing there, watching her sleep. I checked the entire room, but found nothing. I was walking back downstairs when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The doll case in the hallway was open, and one of the dolls was missing. It was a porcelain doll with blonde curls and a blue dress that I had seen there just an hour before. I searched the entire house, turning on every light and checking every room. In the living room, I found the doll sitting in the rocking chair, facing the television. I hadn't put it there, and Sarah was still upstairs in bed. My hands were shaking as I picked up the cold porcelain figure. When I turned around to put the doll back in its case, Sarah was standing in the doorway in her nightgown. But her eyes looked different, glassy and vacant like the doll's eyes. She spoke in a voice that didn't sound like hers. "She wants to play with you now." I backed toward the front door, but Sarah moved to block my path. Behind her, I could see more dolls scattered throughout the house, no longer in their cases. They were positioned as if they had been walking around, some facing the stairs, others gathered near the windows. The power suddenly went out, plunging the house into darkness. I used my phone's flashlight and saw Sarah standing perfectly still in the middle of the room, surrounded by the dolls. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and she was smiling with that same vacant expression. I managed to get around her and ran outside to my car. Through the windows, I could see small figures moving throughout the dark house. I called the police from my car, but when they arrived with the Blackwoods, they found Sarah asleep in her bed and all the dolls back in their proper places. The Chun family had recently moved into a house that used to belong to an elderly woman who had lived there alone for 40 years. They hired me to watch their 5-year-old son Tommy while they attended a work conference overnight. The house still smelled like the previous owner's lavender sachets and old furniture. Mrs. Chin showed me around before leaving, pointing out Tommy's favorite snacks and his bedtime routine. She mentioned that the basement door should stay locked because they hadn't had a chance to clean it out yet. The key hung on a hook right next to the door, which led down to the unfinished basement. Tommy was an easy kid to watch, content with his coloring books and toy cars. We had pizza for dinner and watched a movie together on the couch. Around 8 o'clock, I noticed he kept glancing toward the basement door in the kitchen, but I didn't think much of it first. After putting Tommy to bed, I was washing dishes when I heard a faint sound coming from below. It sounded like someone walking around in the basement, slow and deliberate footsteps on the concrete floor. I assumed it was just the house settling or maybe pipes making noise. The sound continued for about 20 minutes, then stopped completely. I was drying the last plate when I heard Tommy calling for me from upstairs. When I got to his room, he was sitting up in bed, looking scared. He said the lady downstairs wanted him to come play. I asked him what lady he meant, and he pointed toward the floor. He said she had been knocking on his bedroom floor from underneath, trying to get him to come down to the basement. The knocking had stopped when I came upstairs, but now I could hear it too, a soft, rhythmic tapping from below. I checked the basement door and found it still locked with the key hanging in place. But the tapping continued, moving from room to room beneath us, as if someone was walking around down there. Tommy crawled into my lap and whispered that the lady had been living down there since before they moved in. Around midnight, the tapping stopped, but I could hear what sounded like furniture being moved around in the basement. Heavy scraping sounds, like someone dragging chairs or tables across the concrete. I called the Chins, but their phone went to voicemail. I was sitting with Tommy in the living room when we both heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Slow, careful steps coming up toward the locked door. The doorknob turned back and forth, but the lock held. Then I heard keys jingling on the other side of the door. The basement door opened slowly, and I could see the dark stairway leading down into blackness. A musty smell drifted up from below, mixed with that same lavender scent from the sachets. Tommy grabbed my hand and said she found her keys. I scooped up Tommy and ran to my car, not stopping to grab her coats or my purse. As I backed out of the driveway, I could see a pale figure standing in the kitchen window, watching us leave. The Chins found an elderly woman living in their basement the next day, along with furniture and belongings from the house's previous owner. I was 19 and working as a live-in babysitter for a wealthy family who traveled frequently for business. The Harrington house was a modern mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows and an advanced security system. I had my own room on the second floor, right next to 10-year-old Madison's bedroom. The family had been gone for 3 days on a business trip to Seattle, leaving me to care for Madison and maintain the house routine. Madison was mature for her age, but had been having trouble sleeping since her parents left. She kept saying she heard voices in the walls at night. On Wednesday night, I was helping Madison with her homework in the study when the security system chimed. The control panel showed that a window sensor had been triggered in the basement recreation room. I checked the app on my phone, but all the cameras showed empty rooms. I called the security company, and they said it was probably just a loose connection or a small animal outside. They would send someone to check it in the morning. Madison and I went back to her homework, but she seemed more anxious than before, constantly looking over her shoulder. Around 11 that night, after Madison was asleep, I was in my room reading when I heard the security chime again. This time, it was a motion detector in the main hallway downstairs. I checked the camera feed on my phone and saw a shadow move quickly past the bottom of the stairs. I armed myself with a baseball bat from the garage and slowly made my way downstairs. All the lights were still on, and nothing seemed out of place, but I had this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. The silence felt heavy and wrong. I was checking the front door locks when I heard Madison scream from upstairs. I ran up 2 steps at a time and found her standing in her doorway, pointing down the hall toward my room. She said a man had been standing in my doorway, watching her bedroom door. We searched my room together, checking the closet and under the bed, but found nothing. Madison was too scared to go back to her own room, so I let her sleep in my bed while I sat in the chair by the window. I kept the baseball bat across my lap and watched the hallway through the cracked door. At 2 in the morning, I saw him. A tall figure in dark clothes, standing at the end of the hallway, just watching Madison's empty bedroom. He stood perfectly still for several minutes, then slowly turned and looked directly at me through the crack in my door. I quietly called 911 while keeping my eyes on the figure. When I looked again, he was gone, but I could hear footsteps moving through the house below us. The operator stayed on the line while police rushed to the house, their sirens getting louder as they approached. The police found evidence that someone had been living in the crawl space above the basement ceiling for several days. There were blankets, food containers, and photographs of Madison and me going about our daily routines. They arrested a man who had been doing maintenance work on the house the previous month.